Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I have invited you here in order to revisit the events that transpired on June 1st, 2020 at approximately 4:55 p.m. on Interstate 676. As many of you are aware, while intervening in a demonstration, members of the police department SWAT unit deployed less than lethal munitions in the direction of groups and individuals who had entered the roadway in order to proceed with the protest that began earlier in the day. During the response, members of the SWAT unit deployed the following types of less than lethal munitions: OC spray, also known as pepper spray; CS gas, also known as tear gas; white smoke, which is used to dilute actual chemicals; beanbag rounds, and plastic pellets containing OC spray. In the immediate aftermath of the use of these munitions, I then joined Mayor Kenney in a joint statement wherein I stated, "Today's deployment of tear gas was a means to safely diffuse a volatile and dangerous situation and restore order when it became increasingly clear that other measures were ineffective in accomplishing that necessary objective." In addition, in a subsequent press conference held on June 2nd, 2020, I stated, "The option of deploying tear gas was selected only when it became evident that other options were not effective." In the weeks that have followed, I have learned that relative to 676, those statements are substantively inaccurate, as I have now personally viewed video evidence that largely contradicts the material portions of those statements. In making those statements, I relied on information which was relayed to me after the initial deployment of the described munitions, and for that, I humbly apologize to those who were directly impacted, as well as to our communities at large. As recently as today, I have viewed video posted by the New York Times, by which I am extremely disturbed and, quite frankly, sickened beyond description. Some of the video depicts our officers utilizing the force instruments gratuitously and in complete divergence from our policy, Directive 10.2, which states with specific regard to OC spray, "The use of OC spray is not to be used for the dispersal of nonviolent persons for disorderly crowds and in situations where people are peacefully exercising their constitutional rights of free speech or assembly." For this unjustifiable use of force, I also deeply and very humbly apologize. And I am committed to repairing the damage that this event has caused to already the very strained police-community relations that we have been experiencing. To that end, effective immediately, I am declaring a categorical moratorium on the use of tear gas for the dispersal or control of crowds, which includes any persons who are peacefully assembling or passively resisting. We are also evaluating all other munitions available to SWAT personnel. The only time we could consider deploying tear gas is in the case we are confronted with an armed and dangerous individual, as was the case last year on 15th Street. With that said, I am going to temporarily turn things over to Dennis Wilson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dennis Wilson, Deputy Commissioner of Special Operations. I've been in this position for about 3.5 years. On June 1st, I was the incident commander. I was on site. I and I alone gave the approval to use CS gas. I did this based on what I could see from my position and also what I had been hearing on the radio. I had a clear understanding with Commissioner Outlaw on how I was to use less than lethal munitions. We had several conversations. I knew the rules of engagement. Commissioner Outlaw wanted me to call her prior to using any CS gas. I did that at 52nd and Market. I did not do that during the protest on 676. Things happened quickly. I didn't call the commissioner. I gave the approval, and it was me and me alone, like I said. For violating the rules of engagement and the commissioner's trust, I'm going to take a voluntary demotion to my previous civil service rank, which is chief inspector, and I believe that's going to happen immediately. And that's what I have, Commissioner.
Back over to Commissioner Outlaw.
Thank you. As you may be aware, this entire matter is under internal investigation and will also be reviewed externally. So I am very limited in the level of detail I can offer at this time. That said, I do anticipate making additional personnel adjustments as the investigation continues. One such action will take place tomorrow when an officer assigned to SWAT will be given a formal notice of a 30-day suspension with intent to dismiss. That officer is observed on video utilizing OC spray on civilians in violation of our policy. He is being charged departmentally with conduct unbecoming an officer, unauthorized and/or excessive use of force while in an official capacity. In addition, the investigative packet has been submitted to the District Attorney's Office for review. At this point, we are not naming the officer because he has not yet been given formal notice. However, we will do so after formal notice has been given. I will certainly have more to say concerning these events at a later time. And at this point, I will turn things over to Mayor Jim Kenney. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I am as disturbed as Commissioner Outlaw by what is depicted in the New York Times video report. You're all aware of the internal investigations that we previously announced, and as we said last week, we are retaining an independent consultant to conduct a comprehensive examination of the city's response. But in watching this Times report, it was clear to me that we cannot wait for the results of these probes to take action. Members of the department made decisions on use of force that were completely unacceptable. I fully support the Commissioner's decision to place a moratorium on tear gas and other non-lethal methods of responses, and sincerely hope it becomes permanent. I understand the Commissioner is also moving to quickly make personnel decisions that are appropriate given the horrid outcome that we saw. I'm also extremely disturbed by the arrest of reporters on that day and other days who were simply doing their jobs to ensure the public knows what's going on. There will be accountability for all of this, and I am confident in the Commissioner's ability to carry this out. But I want to make it abundantly clear, even though I did not authorize the use of tear gas specifically for I-676, I should also be held accountable. The day before the demonstrations on I-676, in response to an extremely violent situation, I approved the use of non-lethal munitions to be used consistent with the department's current policies. That meant that those options should have been reserved for violent situations and used if and only if lesser methods did not stop the violent behavior. The situation at that moment involved violence, arson, and looting in West Philadelphia, a totally different situation than the protest on 676. In that moment of decision on Sunday, May 31st, I ignored what my instincts told me. I have never believed tear gas was an effective tool when I have seen other cities use it in protest. It always seemed to me to make situations worse, and it has. But after watching the dangerous situation in West Philadelphia with police vehicles and businesses being destroyed, I gave consent nonetheless. And ever since seeing the video of the terrifying incident on I-676, I've regretted my decision from the day before. I also regret my statements that followed, which attempted to justify the use of tear gas in that particular situation. I now know that my statements were based on inaccurate information being relayed from the scene. So I recognize that I also need to apologize. I apologize sincerely to the peaceful protesters out there on that highway on June 1st, who were simply choosing to exercise their right to speak out against injustice and institutional racism. I said weeks ago that this city and this nation needs healing and reconciliation. The events that played out on I-676 on June 1st were the precise opposite of that healing and reconciliation. And I pledge today to do everything I can to fix what is broken within this police department so that responses to demonstrations are appropriate and do not endanger the lives of those who choose to speak out. And I pledge to do better, much better for the residents of the city. And now we'll open up to questions. You know, at the time in the emergency operations center, this is real time stuff. The videos we have are generally aerial videos, so a lot of what you saw in subsequent reports were not available to us at the time. It wasn't real time video for us. And when we saw what obviously was put together by the Times, realized that there were so many other factors involved. We were willing to wait until the investigations were completed, but it would take too long, and it's time to address it now. Well, I saw the culmination of all of the videos that were available from people who were on the scene, people who were protesting. We didn't have the availability of any of that video on June 1st. What we had was what we could see basically from the sky. So that is very clear and jarring, and it needs to be addressed, and it will be addressed. They were the reports at the time.
So adding to the first question and then answering the question that was just asked around projectiles, we recognize that a lot of the footage that we now have, to the mayor's point, a lot of the video footage that we initially had did not provide the level of detail that the New York Times story showed. With that said, and if you noticed, that's why, and I wholeheartedly supported an external investigation, an objective external investigation, to make sure that we were looking at everything from all angles. Now, obviously, once this information was brought to my attention, I saw it this morning, I believe the right thing to do is, when I had the confidence as the commissioner to step out and say, this is what was relayed to me and decisions were made because of this, when I see for sure in front of my face that that's contradictory and pockets of it was contradictory to what was told, it is also my role as a leader of this organization to own it and step up and say, although we still haven't completed a full-out investigation, but we know enough information right now where there's contradictions in what I initially said. And I think it's important for me as a leader of this organization to come back and step up on that, apologize for that, and take ownership for that. Again, the investigation is not finished. We did see a vandalized patrol car, state police car. What the circumstances around that are yet, we're still piecing that together. There are still accounts that projectiles were being thrown. Now, whether or not that was before or after the tear gas, yet to be seen or, concluded based off of the evidence that we do have. But I think it was very, very important, even though it's whatever the date is compared to June 1st, the second I find out as the leader of this department and this organization that there's contradictory information to what I personally came out and said, that's my name behind that, that it's important for me to come out and clarify what I've now seen.
The New York Times is the most comprehensive report that we've seen so far, but other media outlets, including the Inquirer, have published, stories that have been looking at this movement. So this isn't the first report, and then in the meantime, between those 24 days, if this move was so aggressive, why was Deputy Commissioner Wilson able to oversee protests in the meantime?
So I don't want to get deep down in the weeds about personnel actions. I will say that, again, there will be additional personnel moves made. We did actually initiate a lot of investigations the day of. There were some people benched the day after. So we did not publicly announce those things, but things have been in movement ever since June 1st happened. Because I would say every day it grows. As we continue to look at how the events unfolded, getting people identified, getting them scheduled, getting the interviews done. Interviews can also lead to additional interviews and identifying others as subject officers or involved officers. So right now, until this is all concluded, we'll be able to say, here's how many officers were investigated, here's what the findings were, and here's what was being investigated. What's that? No. And I will say this, so leadership 101, right? If you notice, I'm usually very intentional when I speak. I don't give a lot of detail, so I will say on that day, when we first gave the press conference, I don't usually go into that level of detail because you never know what an investigation will glean. That's the reason why I'm not giving you the exact number of people under investigation now, because that can change. I don't want anything to come back and be contradictory to what I'm telling you today.
Commissioner, it's a 30,000-foot view. You've had, admittedly, a full plate since you've been here.
Yeah.
A lot's been going on. I won't go through the list, but I've been talking to a lot of officers. I've been talking with a lot of citizens of this city. Do you still believe you have the confidence of the citizens of this city and the rank and file that those officers will load?
I think I will tell you, morale is certainly low. And regardless of who was sitting in this position, if you look at any major city or actually any police department in the country right now, we're all experiencing low morale, low confidence from the community. I told you before, we've been sitting on a powder keg for various reasons. And then you add the increase in gun violence and us being increasingly asked to do something different around a lot of societal factors that we don't necessarily have a direct influence upon. So yes, I am confident that we'll get to where we need to be. But I think the most telling time for anyone within an organization, whether you're at the ground level or already, all the way at the top, is how we stick through this together. We don't take our balls and go home. We have the difficult conversations, and we really have to rip the Band-Aid off and be really truthful and introspective about what we're experiencing here. There's nowhere else to go but up from this point. So absolutely, I have the confidence that I am the one to get us through this. But there's a lot of things that are tugging not just at the heartstrings of the community, but also at police officers who are also human beings. And with the announcement that we made today regarding 676, that does not take away from the many officers, the many, many officers that are out here doing things within policy, getting up every day, knowing that the sentiment isn't necessarily for them, but they're still out here and engaging. So we will get through this. This is definitely a difficult time, but we'll get through it together.
The personal news that you're talking about, does that include video of that SWAT officer that's seen pepper sprayed or...
That's the officer I'm talking about.
And when you saw that video, what was your reaction to those individuals that were kneeling in a compromised situation?
Oh, I was disgusted. I said it on that day. Up until this point, that was the clearest incident from the freeway. I was hoping that it would have been a one-off to deal with, but I was disgusted on that day. I'm as disgusted as I am today about that, and that's why we took the action. That officer was placed on admin duty the next day, or actually, I don't remember, it might have been that night. But again, we don't advertise everything that's being done. We could probably do a little bit more of that, but at the same time, I'm also cognizant of the rights of my employees as well.
Kristen and then Jeff, because we got to wrap it up.
I just real quickly, Commissioner, there was reporting early on that the state police, there was a trooper who was surrounded, he was in danger. Was that not accurate?
We still don't know, right? Because there's still timeline questions about whether or not, so the video that we all see right now, there's an empty vehicle. But at some point, well, that's what was being reported from the ground. I'm not saying at this point that it's completely inaccurate, but what I am interested in is timeline. If, in fact, that did occur, at what point did that happen? And was that before or after the tear gas was deployed? Because that was one of the reasons why we said the tear gas was deployed. I can't go into more details about that because I'm not going to lock myself into something that would just evolve around speculation.
On the day of the protest, it's been reported that the Deputy Kishmer had the full package in on that Saturday when they had the big demonstration that all went flew, and that someone limited the package, reduced it. Was that you? Did you reduce
No.
the police department? Who did?
It wasn't me. It
Well,
was
was
it
it
was the
Brian
person
Adams?
responsible for, again, I'm not finger pointing right now. I'm not finger pointing, Joe. What I'm going to say is the same question. What difference does it make if I give you a name? Because here's what happened. The response was not adequate, and here's what I shared. Here's what I shared. I would have liked for us to have far more personnel than we had on that day. It did not happen. And once it was brought to my attention that we did not have enough people, we bolstered from there. I also stated that there will be personnel actions taken as a result of this. I am not going to use, and I know it's a style here sometimes, I'm not going to use a public platform to publicly criticize my personnel for actions or inactions. I'm not going to finger point. I think.
All right, we got to go with Kristen. Jeff.
Mayor, who reduced the package?
Can I answer the mayor, just make sure, number one, you've spoken with any of the protesters that were actually
Yeah.
And the second is, Mayor, can you give a little bit more of a timeline of when the outside consultant will be coming in and kind of what that process looks like right now?
Absolutely. And I'll say this. Yes, he did fall on his sword, and I think that speaks very highly to his character, ultimately.
The person who reduced the package that
He's here to speak for himself. No one else is. That's why I'm not naming names. With that said, I have spoken to protesters after this, and quite frankly, it was certainly after 676. There was a person who came up to me and said, the irony, they wanted to take a picture with me because they were happy to see me. And she said, you know what? I was up there that day on 676, and I just certainly hope that you guys do better, because what I saw made me feel very sad. And I know that you're the person to clean this up. And I said, I apologize for what you experienced that day. And she said, well, you need to apologize to everybody who was there. And that's why I think it was important for me to apologize publicly today, because I know what I had said publicly previously. So yes, I have spoken to protesters, and I know we've attempted to reach out to additional protesters who were there so we can get their statements as well.
CBS 3, we're done. Oh, okay.
The outside consultant,
Thanks,
well,
guys.
that's something that the outside consultant for,
Oh, I'm sorry. Good man.
so we're working with the law department, who is who has put together a process to get I don't know if Marcel, if you want to speak to this, putting it together a process to have that external consultant come. So do you want to?
Thanks, guys.
And we're working in full cooperation with the law department.
It's still pending. Nobody's been selected yet, so.
Are you in the process of selecting it? Are we there yet? Or like how
Accepting responses.
the proposals are kind of done?
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys.